Hello and welcome to Into the Abyss podcast. My name is Todd Decker, and I'm here with Jeff Smith, once again, our Star Wars expert. Jeff, what shirt do you have on today? Is it a Star Wars shirt?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because I specifically brought my my Star Wars shirt today. It's got the Death Star and some Rebel and Imperial spacecraft.
Ooh.
So yeah,
very nice.
I'm gonna run out of these eventually. I'll have to start.
We'll have to buy more.
The same ones again. Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's a good solution.
I don't think I have any Star Wars shirts. I'll need to get one. My wife does. She has a Star Wars shirt, but I don't think I have any, which is too bad. I feel a little unqualified. So,
this is the red is not exactly my best color, so I was taking a little bit of a risk with this one.
Oh,
okay. Okay.
Well, yeah, you wear it well.
Thanks.
All right. So I think today we talked a little bit about what we're going to get into. It's a more specific topic, kind of about the machinations of Semper/Emperor Palpatine / Darth Sidious, and how Padmé or Queen Amidala was involved in that. And I'll let you kind of introduce that topic. But first, I wanted to play a little clip just for fun. And this is going to kind of undercut our whole thing here, but it's fun.
We gotta keep it lighthearted, Todd.
Yes,
it doesn't have to get too serious.
Exactly. So so let me share this with you. So this will be QuickTime share computer sound. Okay, and here we go. This is a little clip from The Simpsons.
We're live at the opening of the latest chapter of the epic space saga, Cosmic Wars. And the nerds have emerged from their basements, wearing strange costumes to shield their pasty skin from the moonlight.
Amendments? Regulatory agencies? What the fuck, bud?
Don't worry, they're just getting the plot out of the way so it won't slow down the pew, pew, pew.
Before the Galactic Senate votes, we shall call roll. Star System Abaton.
Yeah.
Star System Acroilius.
Agam.
Star System Trebulon Prime.
Whoa, Mama, finally some action.
Mr. Chairman, I propose a procedural amendment to Space Bill number 371.
You'll wait your turn.
Very well.
The decision is final. Tabled, this motion is. Or is it?
There you go.
That's great.
I thought that would be appropriate since we're getting into like all of the politics and plot points of the prequels. So,
and for the record, I really like the politics and plot of the prequels. It makes it kind of interesting compared to the other two.
Yes. So this clip is perhaps a little unfair.
Yeah, a little extreme.
But it's about Cosmic
satire.
Wars anyway, right? It has nothing to do with Star Wars.
Yeah.
It's Oh, and I forgot to look up. It's not George Lucas who is in that episode. They always change the name. It's something else. Anyway, so with that introduction, go ahead and introduce us to our topic for today.
All right. So I actually watched The Phantom Menace last night, partially in preparation for this episode. We're starting our annual Star Wars marathon. We watch one movie each week, and it takes longer every year, obviously, with all the new movies that have come out. But between now and the end of the year, we'll watch all 11 Star Wars films. And last night we watched The Phantom Menace, so I think I'm pretty well prepped for what we're going to talk about. What the title of our little discussion here is Padmé's Vote of No Confidence, which refers to in The Phantom Menace when Padmé gets up and she stands before the Senate and she says, "I move for a vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum's leadership." And from that moment on, the chain of events has been set in motion where eventually you'll have Emperor Palpatine, who will take over the galaxy as the first galactic emperor. The dark times begin, and then that sets off all the rest of the events of the prequel and original trilogies. And so the question is, did Padmé make a mistake by making that motion? Did she do the wrong thing And if so, was it because it was immoral or unethical, or was it just simply an unfortunate coincidence that choice happened to lead to some bad things happening? So I thought I'd just kind of set up the sequence of events of how those dominoes all fell. So in the Phantom Menace, those of you who have seen it, I think everyone must have seen it. It must be one of the top 10 most seen movies of all time, I'd have to guess.
Probably, yeah.
But so basically, the Trade Federation comes in and invades Naboo, Padmé Amidala's planet. And because of that, Padmé has to go to the Senate to get the Senate to act and help her save her planet from these invaders. The Senate doesn't act because of bureaucratic failings. So Chancellor Valorum is voted out through this vote of no confidence, which Padmé made the motion for on the advice of Senator Palpatine. And then Senator Palpatine becomes the Chancellor. Meanwhile, Padmé goes back to Naboo and deals with the invasion on her own with the help of the Gungan army and the Jedi. And everything kind of ends up wrapped up nicely at the end of the episode. But now Senator Palpatine is Chancellor Palpatine in Attack of the Clones. He is granted emergency powers. There's a Grand Army of the Republic that is instituted. And by the time the Clone Wars start, and then things start to devolve into chaos and civil war, the entire galaxy is drawn into this war. Eventually, it makes it the conditions prime for Palpatine to seize power and remain in office longer than his term, and eventually he declares himself the Emperor. And
Right.
And then by episode 4, he dissolves the Senate, and there's no longer any republic to speak of by that point.
Right, and I was just thinking of this because it's interesting how with the kind of out of order sequence in which the movies were made, I was thinking of that part in A New Hope because it's right, isn't it when we first meet Grand Moff? Sorry, what's his name? Tarkin.
Tarkin. Yeah.
Or they're in that meeting, right? And they talk about how the Senate's just been dissolved. Because what was it they were saying before then? Like, we can't do such and such because the Senate won't approve it or something.
They're talking about how they have to be careful about holding a senator, and how, if they get sympathy for Leia because she's a senator.
Leia's a senator, right?
She's a senator, yes.
Yeah, right.
On a diplomatic mission. They're afraid that it's going to create sympathy for her and then cause problems with the Senate with getting their legislative agenda, so to speak, passed through the Senate. So instead, Vader and Tarkin say, "Don't worry about that. There's no more Senate." So yeah, Tarkin delivers that news.
Right, which is interesting because you don't really see all of the political structure or what was the political structure of the Republic / Empire in New Hope. You don't see much of it, right? Like you don't see the Senate chamber and all of that, but it's there in the background. I mean, George Lucas definitely had it in mind because it's referenced, and so it's not just like as simple as we're capturing this person and holding her hostage, but there's a lot more complexity behind it.
It was 20 years between Revenge of the Sith and The New Hope, so there's all that time where the Senate is still working and trying to maintain some semblance of a republic.
Yes,
but ultimately they fail, and the regional governors take over and directly under the command of the Emperor. So.
Yeah. It's very similar to some politics of the Roman Republic and Empire, which I would imagine was some inspiration.
Exactly. And going back to the Phantom Menace, I just wanted to talk a minute about the title, The Phantom Menace, because I don't know, most of us that were introduced to this movie when we were pretty young, so I'm not sure everyone has thought about what it means.
Mm-hmm.
But the menace, meaning, the someone who's causing trouble, basically, in stoking fear. The menace is, on the face of it, the Trade Federation, right? Because you have Naboo is attacked by the Trade Federation. So on the surface, that's what you see, is the Trade
Right.
Federation is the bad guy. But behind that, you find out, no, they are actually being puppets of the Sith. And then behind that, you find out the Sith is Darth Maul. So the Jedi, the first Sith that they meet is Darth Maul, and they think, oh, so it wasn't really the Trade Federation. They're just being used by the Sith, and they return without our knowledge somehow. So now the menace is Darth Maul. But then like one of the last lines of the film is, which was killed, the master or the apprentice? Because there's always two Sith. And so then, the camera pans over to Senator Palpatine standing there. And so then you realize, oh, there's Darth Sidious, who we have seen in the movie, but the characters don't know that Darth Sidious is really there other than the Trade Federation. Darth Sidious has been pulling the strings. So he is the phantom menace behind all of them.
Yeah.
And even one level beyond Sidious, nobody really knows besides Palpatine himself that it's Senator Palpatine is Sidious, who is the Sith, who is pulling the strings of the Trade Federation. So he is the phantom menace, Senator Palpatine.
Yeah. Well, and okay, so we'll get into like whether Padme made the right decision and all that. But I wanted to mention something else that I was thinking of last night is over the course of the saga, the how everything ties back to Naboo, because Palpatine is from Naboo, right? Now, is that was he just pretending to be from Naboo, or was he like?
No, he's actually from.
He's born
Naboo,
there.
is my understanding.
Yeah. So Padme, so the Skywalker and Palpatine families are both related to Naboo. I mean, I guess Anakin's like half Force, half Tatooine niece or whatever, right? But Luke and Leia, they're pretty much Naboo. That's their origin, right? And then and then if you go all the way to the Rise of Skywalker, Rey also ultimately descends from Naboo. So when she adopts the Skywalker name, I mean, in a way she's kind of related, right? I mean, if very distantly, but at least she's descended from the same planet. It was just interesting to me to think about how the Palpatine and Skywalker families are very, very closely intertwined in their origins and, of course, in their interactions throughout the saga.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Naboo and Tatooine are supposedly pretty close together.
Right.
Because that's how they were able to get there so quickly. But if you think about, Naboo and Tatooine are probably extreme opposites of what you'd expect a planet to be like. One is lush and green.
Right. Well, a paradise, basically.
The mother, Then you have the Tatooine is kind of like the father. You have, it's barren and harsh and very uninhabitable, basically.
Yes.
But and then those two together kind of form your Skywalker whole.
Right. Yeah.
The dark, and in both of them, there's the dark and the light.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have Palpatine from Naboo and Anakin from Tatooine.
Yeah.
So that it's kind of a yin and a yang of Star Wars.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like I don't know if there were complaints about like the feel of Naboo being like too idyllic for the Star Wars universe, like.
I love that about it.
Yeah, but I mean, you kind of over the long view, you kind of see why, right? It's like you were just explaining. There's reasoning behind it. Well, and also, you're setting up the old times, the way things were. Like my understanding is Naboo also was kind of like, well, it seems to be like a paradise, basically. The Trade Federation was taking advantage of it, but it was like almost like this, just ideal state where everything worked well, and then it was screwed up by the galactic intervenings and Palpatine and all of that.
My wife and I often talk about where we'd want to live in the Star Wars universe, and that's often a top choice would be Naboo. I think
Naboo.
You can't get much better than Naboo.
I don't know what else you would choose. Yeah, that's pretty much the best.
Yeah.
What are some of the runner-ups?
Maybe have an apartment on Coruscant, so you could go visit the big city sometime.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I guess well, Yavin seems pretty nice.
Yeah.
Alderaan seems like it would have been nice too.
Oh yeah, Alderaan would have been a great one.
Do we ever see Alderaan, like the surface
Very
of it?
little of it. There's a few shots of it from Revenge of the Sith that you can see. It looks kind of like a Geneva, Switzerland type mountain location or something.
Huh. I'll have to. Okay, like at the end.
Yes.
I'm actually in the middle of watching Revenge of the Sith right now. So we stopped it because we were, it was late at night. So I have to finish it. But so I've actually been watching the prequels. And so we watched The Phantom Menace. So it's fresh in my mind, fortunately. And then we watched Attack of the Clones, and now we're in Revenge of the Sith. But like you said, like I think everyone's seen The Phantom Menace. I was a young kid when I saw it, like young teen, or preteen, I guess, and a lot of it went over my head. Like all of the stuff we're talking about today, basically. I didn't understand what was going on there.
So maybe I'll go ahead and move on to taking a step back to Palpatine's grand plan. So everything that happens in the prequel trilogy is according to Palpatine's plan, or at least it serves his ultimate end.
All as he has foreseen. Right?
Yes, I mentioned that in the notes that in Return of the Jedi, he says everything is proceeding as I have foreseen, which means he's a man who can foresee things. So it's reasonable to assume that he was also foreseeing many of these same things happening in the prequel trilogy, that the reason he was able to execute his plan so well is because he could foresee what was going to happen and change and alter his plans accordingly as things changed, or maybe people didn't react quite the way he had expected. There is some reason to think that things didn't proceed exactly as he had foreseen. For example, he seemed to be taken aback when Padmé goes back to Naboo to fight against the Trade Federation in person.
Right.
Although watching it last night, I did notice that that when he hears that report, he's kind of seems happy about it. When Padmé leaves his office, he's like, "No, don't go.
Mm-hmm.
They'll make you sign the treaty. It's not going to be a good thing." But then she says, "I have to do this," and she leaves. And then as she leaves, he smiles, and it's like,
I'll have to watch that again. Yes, I thought of that as well. I was like, because now that I'm watching it, I had no idea who Palpatine was the first time I saw Phantom Menace. I didn't even when they panned to him at the end, I didn't catch that until other kids told me. But
another thing I noticed is that they play the Emperor's theme when they show him a couple of times and showing Sidious. So I think the connection's supposed to be clear.
Really, in Phantom Menace?
In the Phantom Menace, yes.
Oh, okay. I'll have to watch Phantom Menace again.
So, so basically, so there may have been some surprises that were thrown in. He clearly, if you watch the whole Clone Wars animated series and all the movies, it seems like he's thrown for a couple of loops. I'll give him that. But in the Phantom Menace, if you look at just that film, there's only one thing that really had to happen for the rest of the trilogy to continue on its course, and that was for him to become the Chancellor.
Right.
Without becoming the Chancellor, nothing else would have really happened, or it wouldn't have mattered what happened as much.
Right.
He would have had to find some other way to become a Chancellor. So it didn't matter who won the battle in Naboo. It didn't matter if they succeeded or failed.
Right.
It mattered that there was a conflict that caused sympathy for his planet, for him as the senator, to be nominated and ultimately chosen to be the new chancellor after Valorum. So he succeeded. Everything else was just irrelevant to him, and it's kind of continues on that way in the next two films.
Right.
A lot of what happens doesn't really matter to him. He doesn't care.
Yeah, like the battle on is it Genosian? Gnosis. Yeah, so like, I mean, I guess his guy loses the battle, right? But I mean, it doesn't really matter because it starts the war. So, and Yoda sees that
and
that they lost by having the battle in the first place.
Exactly. Darth Maul in the last season of Clone Wars tells Ahsoka that everything that you see happening was all planned and plotted and foreseen by Palpatine. He's pulling all the strings. It goes back to in the Phantom Menace around the same time you have Sifo Dyas, who is one of the old Jedi, goes and orders the clone army, and you learn a little bit more about that in the Clone Wars. And I forget the details sometimes, but I think it was related to Palpatine's wishes that occurred. It was all Palpatine's plan that you plant the seeds of having a clone army, and then 10 years later you have a conflict that requires an army just at the right time that all this is happening. In Attack of the Clones, Padme comes back. The reason she's on Coruscant is to vote, now that she's a senator, vote on whether they should create a grand army of the Republic. And she's adamantly against creating an army. And it's too bad. In the end, that's another pivot point where maybe she could have made a difference if she had been able to vote against it. But I don't know if it was possible for them to avoid that conflict, because they were being attacked by the Separatist army with the droids and the clones. So the clones being there protected them. It was kind of a necessary defense.
Yeah.
They were trapped by Palpatine in that moment. They had to accept the army. They had to fight back. I think even Padme, if she had been in the Senate, probably would have had to have voted to create the army.
Yeah.
So I don't know if they really had much agency in
Right.
that moment to avoid.
Their choices were very constricted.
Exactly. And then if you go into Revenge of the Sith, the conflict was just so protracted and divisive. And the Jedi were right in the thick of it. They should have probably extracted themselves from the situation so they could see things more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
But being so embedded in the violence and the war and the tactics and the strategy, they were blinded to the overall dangers that they were putting themselves in. There's some deleted scenes from Revenge of the Sith where Padme is negotiating among other senators to try to resolve the conflict peacefully.
Mm.
That is probably the only way they could have avoided what ended up happening, which is Palpatine seized on the emergency powers to prolong his term as Chancellor.
Right.
He was Chancellor for about 13 years, if you count the years from the Phantom Menace until the end of Revenge of the Sith. So by then, he has enough emergency powers and enough sympathy, and then Order 66 with the Jedi and everything, that's like his spark that he's able to say, oh, the Jedi have turned against us.
Yeah.
If they had been neutral third parties and hadn't been embedded in the armies, then that's probably the last line of defense they would have had to protect
Mm-hmm.
themselves from him taking over. But unfortunately, they fell right into his traps, did everything he needed them to do so that he could be declared the emperor.
Yeah. And what's interesting too is that like his power kept growing, but even from the very start, even when he just became Chancellor, he was already a more powerful Chancellor than the previous. What was it? Valorum, you said?
Valorum, yes.
Yeah, I always forget his name. But because Valorum was weakened by scandal, and there was so the bureaucrats had a lot of hold over him, and just by virtue of being a new Chancellor, and having that fresh face in there, he was already more powerful and able to take greater actions than Valorum. So just from the start, it wasn't just that he became Chancellor; he was a more empowered Chancellor, which was kind of the whole point, right?
Yes, and he was also very charismatic and persuasive. It's kind of funny watching the movies because you kind of like him.
Yeah,
like he's a likable person. He in the Clone Wars animated series, he's also he's two-faced. He's very sympathetic, and he's like, "Oh, are you okay, Padme? We need to keep you safe." He has the you are sympathetic to him on the one hand, but then when he's Sidious, he's obviously pure evil.
Yeah.
So you see those two sides of him, and it's easy to keep them separate and almost feel bad for him, I guess, or supportive of him.
Yeah.
But and so it's kind of an interesting question to me: is he both sincere on both sides? Maybe he really is kind of a nice guy and he likes the good stuff, but he also, maybe he's really being sincere about his care for Padme when she's going on dangerous missions.
Like he's this divided character. Yeah,
maybe. Or maybe he's just being cold and calculating, and he knows that that's exactly what he needs to say. It's kind of the way it's played, though. It seems like he's sincere.
Well, there's like the George Costanza line. It's not a lie if you believe it. Right. So the most effective way for him to pull off this sympathetic character that will be convincing to other people might be to actually be sincere.
Yeah, maybe
When
that
he's in
helps
the
him
setting.
put on the cloak, and then he can turn off his feelings. I think there's probably some truth to that. That all of us have a cloak that we can pull over ourselves and become a different person.
I think that's definitely the case. Yeah. That we're actually we have these divided selves that when we're in different settings we are kind of different people, and it's and people could look at it afterwards and think like, well, how does that work? That how do you reconcile those two sides of yourself? And doesn't really reconcile, but other than saying that, well, in the moment you are what you are here, and then something else there. I don't know if that's what Lucas had in mind, but I kind of like that way of looking at it.
Interesting to think about. And he's by far the most evil character in the saga. Most clearly evil. He's not one that you would ever expect to be redeemed.
Right.
But it's just kind of interesting to see those beginnings.
I saw a funny meme a little bit ago, and it shows Anakin and Palpatine talking, and Anakin asks Sidious or Palpatine, like, is 4 a lot? And Palpatine says, well, it depends. Like Sith, yeah. Jedi Knights walking into my Imperial chambers, no.
Limbs, I'd say probably just right.
Limbs, yeah.
So,
and then there's a deficit many times in the Skywalker family for those, isn't there? They tend to lose their hands.
Yeah. All right. So one of the reasons I chose this topic to talk about is because it leads very well into ethics, a discussion of ethics. Because ethics is something that interests me. I know you have a big interest in ethics as well. There's 3 main branches of ethics. You have your deontological ethics, meaning something is either right or wrong, no matter what the circumstances. You either need to do X or do Y. Don't ever lie. That's a classic deontological ethical principle. The second branch is your consequentialism or teleological ethics, where any action can be right or wrong depending on what the result of it is. So you should be judging your actions based on what the result was. And sometimes that can be tricky. There's different sub-branches within that as far as, maybe your intended action matters, or maybe your intention doesn't matter as long as the result is the correct one. And then the third major branch is the virtue ethics, which is to say that there are attributes of kind of an ideal person that you should aspire to, that such a virtuous person would make the right decision in the right circumstances. And you can't really judge what that would be beforehand. You have to just be the virtuous person, and you can go into it and then decide what it is. I'm kind of simplifying it here, but that's the basic branches. So starting with the deontological perspective, should Padmé have moved for that vote of no confidence in Chancellor Valorum? Was that a wrong choice? And also, secondarily, should she have gone back and gone to war with the Trade Federation? And then thirdly, should they have created the Grand Army of the Republic? So those are kind of 3 decisions that she was part of.
Right.
She was from a peaceful planet. They were supposed to, have only just a small security force. She was against going to war. She was against taking actions that would lead to war or more death. But she kind of ends up causing a lot of war and a lot of death. If you think about it.
Right.
So I'm curious what you think from just a purely, deontological perspective. Do you think it was the right or wrong decision?
Yeah. So I'm trying to think through this. I guess a vote of no confidence or just changing leadership seems like that's a pretty standard thing. But so Valorum. One of the things I remember in the Phantom Menace was she says he's been our biggest supporter, right? So is he other than being ineffective? Is he corrupt, or is he just besought with corruption charges, or what's his character like?
We have the word of Palpatine that he's in the pocket of bureaucrats, but he's of course an unreliable narrator.
Right. So. Yeah. Well,
so
and I guess you can be under the influence of people without necessarily being bad, or maybe he's just impressionable. Yeah, I don't know. It could mean a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
And people can have corruption charges without really being corrupt. So I don't know. And I mean, I guess it doesn't seem like it's necessarily a problem for her to turn against him on the political scene, even though he's been on her side up till that point. I mean, he probably wasn't too happy about it. But if it is just the case, okay, sorry, we got to lay you off, buddy. We're not getting the results that we need. I'm thinking in the business world how that might work out, and I guess in the political scene it could work out that way too. So I don't know. Is there some deontological principle that would be violated by that action?
I don't think so. I've been thinking about this as well. I think the one thing that I would say is she should have probably done more diligence and not trusted the word of Palpatine. She should have talked directly to Valorum and tried to have a dialogue with him and say, what do you think we can do?
That's a fair point. Yeah. Well, and I think of the Declaration of Independence, how it talks about how prudence dictates that if you're going to do some drastic measure, you should make sure that you got to give reasons for it and you got to justify it. Kind of the due diligence and justification has to. The amount of due diligence and justification that you do has to correspond to the drasticness of the action. And so, yeah, in that case, she probably didn't. And in a way, it almost seemed like she was just kind of grasping for things she was like, okay, we just got to act. We just got to do things because the political situation is ineffective, so we kind of got to bypass it.
Yeah.
And it almost seems like she doesn't, at least at that point, perhaps doesn't have sufficient respect for the political process. Because she's kind of the Republic doesn't function. I mean, she even says that, right? That does seem like that is foreshadowing something, right? Because if she thinks that the Republic doesn't no longer function, so she's going to bypass its proper procedures, that is kind of setting up a course of action that Palpatine follows as well. That becomes the norm. If we judge that something isn't working, then we can just do things differently. And that kind of is what follows with the rest of the wars, right? So the Chancellor's not supposed to have these emergency war powers, or at least not supposed to have these war powers usually, but we need them, so we're going to give them to him. Yeah, I can see some principles that can be violated there.
And it made me think about, I told you I didn't want to go too far into actual real life politics on this, but there are a couple of parallels, because you have, in America, we have impeachment and that process, which seems to be more geared towards someone who is violating their oath of office. Yeah. And then in other countries, you have the literal vote of no confidence, which I don't think has ever been invoked in the United States for anything. I mean, it's probably so. in legislatures it's a thing, but I know in Canada just last week I saw reported on BBC that Justin Trudeau was subjected to a vote of no confidence, which he passed the vote, so he's still the prime minister. But
which doesn't have to be for corruption, right? I mean, it could just be we just are thinking we need a different leader or something.
Exactly. So I think it's a less severe motion than an impeachment. But I do think having, for political reasons, for petty reasons, to have such a vote probably should be something that people should frown upon. I think if you're a politician in Canada or the United Kingdom or wherever, and you're going to have a vote of no confidence, you should probably have a good foundation for it, and not just being a petty political reason and not something that can't be resolved in other ways, because it weakens the foundations of the institution to be able to too easily remove your leaders from office such that they can't accomplish their agendas that they were elected to do. Similarly, I think with the impeachment proceedings as well, it's been invoked very rarely, and always it's supposed to involve crimes, actions that are unethical or against the will of what the people would want them to do. So I think, to circle back around, I think that Padme probably was acting too rashly here, and she probably should have given it more consideration before she resorted to that.
Yeah, and that seems to be kind of part of her character, in a way, right? I mean, and yeah, I mean, you could look at it from the consequentialist side in the short term, that it paid off, right? Because Naboo was liberated. Although in the long term it was subjected, but it probably paid off. With her people, she was probably very popular, and
have her planet senator installed as the chancellor is probably pretty beneficial.
Sure.
Benefits out of that.
So she could probably look back on that, and her people probably look back on it and it's like, oh yeah, that brash movement paid off. That's what we need in a leader. Sometimes you gotta break the rules to get things done.
I like what you mentioned a bit ago about how how she said our republic isn't working, and that kind of line of thinking. Because in Attack of the Clones, there's a conversation between Anakin and Padme where they're talking about how democracy doesn't work.
Yes.
And how there should just be one person who decides what needs to happen, gets everyone in a room, figures out the best course of action, and they do it. And in an ideal democracy, I think we'd all agree that would be great, is if we could all agree on something and do it. There's so many things that should be done by our governments right now that aren't being done because of petty political disagreements. Yep. And so Anakin's joking solution is, well, maybe we should have someone make them agree. In other words, have an emperor. In a way, that's kind of what Padme was accomplishing by having this vote, is having somebody who was going to kind of force her preferred action on the body. She was expediting her desires and placing those above maybe the longer term interests of the Republic. Now, I'll just stop and say I don't think that Padme was bad. I think she's a very good person, and I think she generally was trying to do the right thing. But in that moment, if she had more time to think about it, I hope she would have made a different decision, and it could have.
Well, maybe that's a reason not to make your head of state a teenager.
There are good reasons for that, for sure. So, you bring up a good point, though. I'm wondering why she's the one that made that motion, being the queen instead of the senator, who is actually a member of the body that was making the decision. But that's question.
I mean, it probably worked out better for Palpatine, right?
For him not to have
it wasn't as self-serving in appearance.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Like, do you think like in the Congress that you could have like a governor come in and say, "Hey, I've moved for a vote of impeachment," and then that's how it starts. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't think that's how it usually works. Anyway, let's move on to the teleological consequentialism, though. So moving on to the teleological ethics, consequentialism. So we know that because Padme installed the Emperor, installed Palpatine into this position, that he ultimately became the Emperor. So if she hadn't done that, he wouldn't have become the Emperor, and the Empire wouldn't have come into existence, absent some other action by some other party down the line. So I think if you were judging her by those consequences, then she made the wrong decision. You also have to ask, could she have foreseen that was going to happen? In which case, you probably have to give her a pass, because I think that's probably a very unlikely sequence of events for the most part. But it did make me kind of wonder, what do you think? Think about some other times along the timeline that they could have steered themselves clear of Emperor Palpatine. Like I mentioned before, if the Jedi had been more farther removed from the war, hadn't been embedded with the armies, hadn't been generals, maybe they could have had clearer heads and avoided the calamity.
Yeah. So there's a when Obi-Wan goes to the planet with the army. So he contacts Yoda and Windu and says, this whole army's been created by Sifo-Dyas, and we didn't know about it. And then Windu says to Yoda, I think we need to inform the Senate. I think they say inform the Senate that our power to of discernment has been impaired by the dark side, and I don't think
And
they
Yoda
ever
says
do.
no.
Do they?
Yeah. I think Yoda says something like, if we do that, then our problems are going to multiply, basically, because then people will know that we have this weakness,
Right.
and they'll exploit it. So, I don't know if I think Yoda's right about that. I don't know if they could have if there was a right way to respond to that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, how much information to share is a difficult problem. Because, in theory, if everyone just knew everything, and then we would act in the right way, right? So Socrates had this idea that immoral actions ultimately go back to ignorance. Like if people really knew and were educated, then people would act ethically, and because imperfect understanding or partial education leads people to make irrational / immoral decisions. But that doesn't seem to convince many people.
Yeah.
That it's not just based on knowledge of a state of affairs. So we do have to conceal information, because there are people who will use information to bad purposes, to harmful purposes. So to protect ourselves, we have to conceal certain information. In the case of the Republic, I think it would have been helpful for them to know, because so the Jedi, they're powerful, right? I mean, they can do. They're extremely good fighters. They can take on. You want to have a Jedi in battle. They can take on multiple people at a time that a regular person couldn't. They can. They have very quick reflexes. They have at least some immediate foresight. So even if they had told the Republic, hey, there's something out there that we don't fully understand, but we need to be on guard, because something's afoot. And it's not us. We're on your side trying to figure out what's going on, and we're going to figure this out together. That probably would have helped in the long term. It would have because I think there was this kind of eventually the public turned against the Jedi, right?
That's true.
And if people had known, like, something's out there, let's be on our guard, looking, hey, something seems suspicious. That Palpatine guy, he's taking on a lot of power. Maybe we should watch him closely. Seems like they still could have been effective in the wars if they had decided to do that, or backing away from the wars completely might have been a good idea too. But so I think in hindsight they should have.
I
that
think
would have helped.
I think you make a good point there. There's a lot of people who will point to Mace Windu and Yoda as basically being the ones who facilitated the downfall of the Jedi Order, because of their hubris, their lack of imagination, perhaps. And even Luke Skywalker in The Last Jedi says that it was their hubris that brought them down, and that's why the Jedi Order needed to end. I think that's a little unfair to Mace Windu in particular, and Yoda. I think they probably recognize that they made some mistakes there. But yeah, I think it's a good point. It's a good lesson to everyone that you have to always be on your guard, because if you're just trusting in your own abilities, you're going to have some blind spots.
Right.
You have to be humble enough to notice that you may not be able to solve all problems on your own.
Yeah. Oh, and I remember in Revenge of the Sith, there comes that point where they've cornered General Grievous, and they're like, okay, this is going to end the war, right? So we're going to see how Palpatine reacts to this, because after this, his emergency powers shouldn't be necessary anymore. So if he doesn't step down, then we know he's acting in bad faith, and we're going to have to take control of the Senate.
Yeah.
And so they're basically, it's a coup, right? They're going to take forcible control of the government. And Yoda does say, like, okay, we have to be careful. This is a dangerous line of thought that we have here. But just the fact that they're going down those lines, that puts them in a very shaky ethical position that, yeah, set them up for the public to turn against them, definitely. I mean, Palpatine could make a plausible case that these were the bad guys. So, yeah, I mean, it does seem a little sketchy in certain ways.
I think this discussion would be incomplete if I didn't bring in, obviously, Anakin's mistakes, because he single-handedly probably handed the Republic over to the Emperor. So we can't ignore that and pin it all on Padmé and Mace Windu and Yoda. So his mistakes, obviously, were trusting in Palpatine more than in the Jedi, caring more about protecting the life of his wife than in the future of the democracy. Even after he killed Mace Windu and started following Palpatine, Padmé tells him, you need you have the power to stop the war, stop the fighting, let diplomacy resume. We can work this out. You haven't gone down the path too far yet. She tried to convince him to do that. And unfortunately, he was already too drunk with his own power and too far down the dark side to turn back and do what was right.
Yeah.
But I think if they had figured that all out earlier, if they had just had a little bit more time to realize that Palpatine was the bad guy, and to realize that Anakin was under his influence, and to realize, how these dominoes were all connected, then they could have, moved a domino out of the way. They could have figured Jedi could have figured out some way to stop that chain of events from continuing down to its conclusion, and letting diplomacy resume, realizing that a lot of the separatists were sincerely people who just didn't want to be part of what they saw as a corrupt empire.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting lesson as well, is that when you have two sides that encompass such a large group of people, and that the only way that works in reality is if you have a lot of good people who choose both sides. Mm-hmm. If you have just a purely evil group of people, it tends to be small. The only way that they can get a lot of power is by convincing a lot of good, rational, reasonable people to follow along with them. And so they have to find some way to convince them of that. And so that's kind of how the separatists were working. Is there were some legitimate reasons for a separatist movement to exist. There were legitimate reasons for the Republic to continue, and having the two armies facilitated a much larger battle, war, bloody conflict than needed to be to work out those differences. I think it's kind of interesting to think about, what if there had never been an army? It seems like a very foolish thing to have a republic without an army. From our modern perspective, how can you have a country that doesn't hold itself together without an army? Because you're always going to have. You need to have police. You need to have an army. You need to have forces. But maybe, shift your paradigm. Is it possible to have a coherent nation without an army? Is it possible to have a just society without a police force, essentially? How much force is necessary to harbor a safe, secure, just society? That's a legitimate question. I think that probably it's not on either extreme.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is that you probably do need to have an army, but whether you use it to the extent... because yeah, so I mean, pretty much most countries in the world have an army of some kind, or rely on another country that has an army. The United States, for example, this is a fraud example to use because we use our army in other countries, but we don't use it on ourselves, right? To enforce. We use police forces, which is a more scaled down level of force, and perhaps not scaled down enough. Right, that's an issue that is under discussion right now. But yeah, so I mean, I guess not to get us into trouble, we'll stick with the Galactic Republic. So they had this clone army, right? But did they have to use it in the way that they did? You know, maybe they could have used it more as a peacekeeping force rather than just going in and annihilating places.
Maybe they could have let the separatists leave. You know, there's arguments either way.
Secession could have, yeah. I mean, secession is an interesting topic. I mean, we're kind of it's complicated because oftentimes secessionist movements have questionable human rights issues themselves. So, you know, the American Civil War is a good example of that, but probably other countries that have had secession movements in certain cases. I mean, if Scotland were to secede, probably not a big deal. But or Quebec or something like that. But that's probably the main concern these days. I mean, on our planet, secession is kind of frowned upon on, like, I guess the mainstream international view is that, you know, we don't let secession just happen. But yeah, I mean, maybe it's not a completely off limits idea. And you know, and it can, and resisting too much can lead to those militarized states, which the republic / empire ultimately became.
Yeah, it's interesting because there are people, obviously, who are extreme pacifists who think that force should never be used, war should never be used. And I don't quite understand that mentality because you can't capitulate completely to bad influences.
Yeah, because it's letting force occur.
Yeah,
right. It's letting violence occur, basically.
Just because I'm peaceful and pacifistic doesn't mean that my enemy is going to be peaceful and pacifistic.
Right.
There still may be death and destruction, and
it's like you try to engineer a situation where you minimize it.
Yeah, exactly. Which sometimes involves carrying a big stick, as they say.
Yeah.
But treading lightly. So
yeah, there's kind of like a local and global minima there, because I mean, I guess if everyone were dead, then there wouldn't be violence either. But that would be a global minimum that we wouldn't want. But lots of conditions to that calculation.
So moving on to the last branch of ethics is the virtue ethics. So I thought that an interesting way to briefly wrap this section up is just to ask: is Padme a hero, or is she a pawn, or is she something in between?
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I guess she's kind of both, right? Because along with everyone else, because, you know, I was thinking, you know, like we were criticizing Yoda and Windu and all those guys, and Padme, like all of them were used, right? They were played by Palpatine. So I mean, you really can't deny that they were pawns. I mean, even Obi-Wan Kenobi. I mean, Obi-Wan Kenobi's like the hero of renown, right? He's like when you're first introduced to him in Episode 4, you know that he's this hero from the old times. So yeah, I mean, I guess it would have to be both. But yeah, I mean, she definitely was. She was a pawn to an extent as well.
Yeah.
As far as her character, like, does she have a pawn type character where she was just pushed around to be pliable in anyone's hands? I mean, that doesn't seem to be the case. She was a very strong leader, very strong personality. Um, Definitely wanted to do the right thing. Um, had a strong moral compass. Depending, it may have gone in different directions, but I mean, she was definitely ethically minded. Um, so yeah, it's almost like I wouldn't want to say that she's a pawn as a character, as a description of her entire character, but
Yeah.
I guess more as a plot pawn.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I agree with everything you said. I think she has all those characteristics you'd want in a hero like character, someone who's compassionate, who prefers peace and defense to offense or to aggression. She cares about those who are, seemingly beneath her. She doesn't, consider herself to be above even begging for help from those who might be considered her inferiors.
Yep.
She's willing to sacrifice. She's willing to suffer along with her people and along with anyone who's suffering. So she's a very admirable character. I'd say she's one of the top heroes of the entire saga. That's my opinion.
Yeah. Well, and the duality of that is kind of interesting to think about. Thinking of ourselves, like, okay, how can we be played at times? It probably happens to all of us,
Mhm.
and try to do your best to avoid it, but
Yeah.
you have to realize that it's probably probably happens to some level in certain circumstances.
And I'd say one other thing I want to mention: Padme and Shmi Skywalker, the two matriarchs of this family line, and I think they together are the overarching heroes. They plant the seeds that will bring safety, security, peace, harmony to the galaxy. Padme, she rejects Anakin's offer to join him and rule over the galaxy. Instead, she secretly gives birth to the two children and gives them a safe home where they can grow and become, because of the love that she had for them. Kind of like a Lily Potter thing from Harry Potter, where she gives up her life to save Harry, and that ultimately makes him able to defeat Voldemort. You could make the argument that Padme's sacrifice to save her children also led to them being able to defeat the Empire and the First Order eventually. And then Shmi Skywalker also planted those same seeds as the Skywalker matriarch. She taught Anakin good principles, even though he may have forgotten them. He comes back around to them, and he realizes who he really is by the end, and he's able to both. I think his redemption is very formative in Luke's character and what he can end up going on to do.
Yeah.
And also, it teaches Luke something about redemption and about goodness that he kind of has to relearn again in the sequel trilogy.
Right.
But ultimately, even Rey learns that same lesson of redemption and balance and goodness and decency that that he can trace back to Shmi Skywalker and to Padme Amidala.
Yeah. And it's interesting, like, because there are different stories that all pertain to reality. So, because not everyone, I guess everyone is redeemable, but not everyone is going to be redeemed, right? So, like, Palpatine is one who's not, and that's reality, right? I mean, certain people are just not going to be. They have a different plan. They're not looking to be redeemed, and I guess that's important to understand. But I guess on the more inspiring side, it's always possible, right? Vader, I mean, you never would have thought Vader would have either, but he did. And Also, of course, Ben Solo.
Mhm.
And you know, I mean, even some more less dramatic turns. Han Solo, right? I mean, he wasn't
Yeah.
exactly a good guy,
Yep.
but transformed. Um, so there are all those reformations going on. Well, this gives me a very a greater appreciation for the character, as in narrative character of Padme. It makes her quite interesting.
Yeah.
um,
Absolutely. You know, as I was watching the Phantom Menace last night, one thing that I was kind of interested in is watching how the people interact with each other during this saga. There's a lot of trust in the society, even in Tatooine. You have little children running around playing. You
right.
have gangsters, so to speak, who are able to gamble with each other and trust that whoever wins is going to
Right.
get their winnings.
Because the Hutts enforce it.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And you have in Coruscant, you have the whole Republic is built on trust.
Right.
So trust, I think, is a big theme of the saga. Trust deteriorates to the point where if you watch Solo, there's zero trust between anybody.
Solo's like a total disaster. That world. It's kind of it's kind of scary to watch. Like I was just I just read Neuromancer, and then Ready Player One kind of too reminded me of it. Like where you have this world where if you're not a somebody, your life is tough, and it's just tough to survive. And the people who run the show are not good people. And I mean, so Han Solo is basically like comes from like a planet prison, pretty much.
Yeah, and it's, you see how important trust is, because if someone's going to, if Leia's going to go up to a senator and say, hey, we need to do something so that we can overturn this emperor. If you trust that person, you can talk about those issues, and you can maybe start a rebellion. If you don't know who you can trust and you can't trust anybody, then you really lose hope.
Yeah.
Trust is vital to hope. So vital ingredient to hope.
You need a new hope.
You need a new hope, and that's I think one of the keys of the movie A New Hope is that Luke, this wide-eyed kid he's not jaded yet by the ways of the universe, the galaxy. He trusts Leia. He trusts Han. He immediately trusts Obi-Wan and these other characters, and that facilitates his ability to make a difference in the galaxy.
Yeah.
And those rebels are able to trust each other, and from that they're able to get hope. They know there's a brighter future available. And the message of the entire saga can be wrapped up in this thought. If you go back to the Phantom Menace, Anakin tells his mom, he says, remember how you always told me that the biggest problem in this universe is that nobody helps each other.
Yep.
And then that's what allows her to say, okay, fine, you can do the pod race.
Yeah.
Follow that down the line through the entire saga of people trusting each other enough to help each other, and that building hope, and hope is planted as a seed all the way until the Rise of Skywalker, when you have the entire galaxy arrives with Lando Calrissian, and he says, there are more of us, Poe. In that moment, you have seen what trust can do, what hope can do, that people are really fundamentally good, and they just need to be rallied. They need good people will fight if you lead them, as Poe says in the final film. I really like that arc of hope and trust feeding each other to allow a peaceful, harmonious society.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like a redemption of trust, because trust was violated before, right? Because people trusted Palpatine, and it was misplaced.
Exactly.
And it's like that "fool me once, fool me twice" type of thing. People don't want to be suckers, but they had to recover hope and trust in something to be able to reemerge.
Trust but verify.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's a yeah, and you know, you need there's this kind of recurring archetype of like the of uh youth coming in to replace um the old in its time, right? So experience and the knowledge of age is important, but there comes a time where the old king is set in his ways. Uh, he's not able to adapt or run the kingdom as he should, and needs to step down and take place for the youth who maybe isn't as experienced, maybe is a little too wide-eyed and trusting like Luke. But you need that type of novelty and energy to come in and help shake things up a little bit. Um, so you wouldn't have somebody from the old Republic times doing that because you need because they got burned, you know, from Chancellor Palpatine.
That's true. Well, that's about all I wanted to cover here. I think we could talk more about how this applies in real life, but you know, as I think about it, I think it's probably better to just leave that.
It's probably
to
quite
one's
apparent.
Imagination. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we've kind of touched on some of these areas
Yes.
enough. I think people in their own minds could think about how this applies.
Yeah. I think it's
their lives.
best to leave it to that. Yeah, as is often the case with literature and the arts.
Yes.
Leave it free to interpret.
Exactly.
Cool. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. It's a fascinating discussion as always. And I'm just like you. I'm going through the saga and the auxiliaries.
Yeah.
However you want to call them. The Solo and Rogue One, Mandalorian, and all those guys.
Maybe we'll come up with some other fascinating topics for next time as we watch.
Sounds good.